So, hey guys, today we're going to be talking about floodgates, and today we're specifically talking about macro-like effects. So, macrocosmos, fissure, whatever. So, the thing about macro that makes macro so disgusting, in my opinion, right now, is that, well, in terms of decks that actually benefit off of macrocosmos actually being on the field, there are very few. So, in terms of archetypes, I can't actually think of like any very much. There might be perhaps two archetypes I think. So the first one probably Cash, and then the second one I believe Metaphys here might benefit, right? And how would you banish your Metaphys cards? Um, let's see. Banish your Metaphys. Do we have a send effect or something? Um, Target one card your opponent controls, banish it. Yep, sure. Banish the top three cards your deck. Banish 5 Memphis cards with different names from your graveyard and or face up from your field. How did they get sent in the first place? This card is banished, shuffle one. Or no, you can shuffle this banished card, add a Metaphys. How did this get banished? Discard a Metaphys card, draw one card. Banish one Metaphys monster from your deck. This card is banished. You can add one Metaphys card. Weird effect. Shuffle this banish card, banish one Metaphys card. Very confusing, Ragnarok. Bash the top three cards of your deck. I don't see any benefit from being under macro because you don't send cards aside from maybe Ascension, as far as I can tell. There's no hard ones return on this, is there? Oh, there is. But there isn't one on Asim Metaphys for whatever reason. So I'ma just say, since Metaphys looks like it's not particularly good to the point where I'm not sure it actually has a way to really interact with macro, I'll just put it as technically beneficial because there is one effect there that benefits, I guess, and it doesn't do anything negative to Metaphys. So yeah, I mean, Metaphys not a great example because it's like terrible, but you know, Kashtira, this makes it so your cards cannot be called by your Kashtira birth. Nothing really changes with this, honestly. It's mostly with preparations and your like Kashtira Theosis and Big Bang. These cards get banished, they have effects, so with Big Bang, you can essentially special summon one of your XYZ material Kashtira monsters if it is attached to specifically a Kashtira Xyz. Aside from that, you can't do that, you know? So if we had like a big eye made with Fenrir, the Fenrir would still be stuck, but you know, whatever. Kashtira Theosis, so if this card gets banished, you can add a banished Kashtira card, any Kashtira card. So for example, we could add Big Bang, we could add Birth. And yeah, that's about it. It's mostly for prep. Aside from that, it doesn't super matter. I guess it matters for Big Bang and Theosis as well. But the biggest benefit is going to be mostly prep, because you can technically banish Theosis and Big Bang from the graveyard, but not having to do so is kind of nice sometimes. But sometimes you do want to banish them because they're like somewhat required, like not legitimately required, but useful for when you want to summon like a Tear Cache or Scareclaw Cache. But for the most part, useful because of Kashtira prep. So for example, if we have Kashtira Arise Heart here on the field, and you were to activate Raigeki with no macro effect, this would just go to the graveyard. With macro up, this would get banished and be special summonable off of Kashtira preparations. And this is probably the only archetype that gets any benefit from macro. Aside from that, I guess there's maybe like some sort of Grenmaju deck, which isn't really archetype specific, just like is mix and nonsense. Just cards like Necrophase as well, I believe. Just something like that. But alright. If we just go ahead and look at some decks that play Dimension Shifter, there, well, now that I think about it, there was also technically Ritual Beast. I believe that deck, it might not be actually that beneficial to be under Shifter. It's just that you can play under Shifter, so it's probably neutral, or you're slightly losing something like Flandres. So with Flandres, it doesn't negatively affect you too much being under macro, but if someone were to just set macro and flip macro, this turns off Stree forever essentially because there's no card in the graveyard to banish. But aside from that, there's also Dreaming Town, which has the effect of if you tribute summon a level 7 or higher monster while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card, change all monsters your opponent controls to face down defense position. So this is essentially a Book of Eclipse that is no longer activatable because this gets banished and does not get sent to the graveyard. So you're losing out on one interaction if you're under like a macro or shifter type of effect. If you were under just a fissure, that would be better for this specifically. And the beneficial thing that does, I suppose, is it could banish your M-Pen for you. But by the time like M-Pen gets off the field, you should have access to Stree already. So it's like kind of iffy, honestly, in my opinion. And to add this, you would still need access to Toucan here. So, I mean, does it really benefit Fu? I mean, I'd argue not so much. And then with Exo Sister, they just don't interact with the graveyard at all, so it's completely neutral, I'd say. It wouldn't positively affect you, doesn't negatively affect you. And yeah, that's all I have to say about Shifter in this list. If you want to play, I guess, like a Shifter and Sprite, you can technically do that. It hurts you because obviously Sprite Elf. And then if you banish just like whatever sprite name, that sprite name will just be gone, or that particular sprite. So for example, if we have sprite blue banished, we have to, well, search or summon another sprite blue from likely our deck or hand. So just not really helpful. And then basically every single deck that's been released since I don't even know how long, since like probably after Vanquish Soul, I believe, like every single deck has had just very bad interaction with macro, just in general. Well, like probably not all of them were that terrible, but even up until this point, right? Like Malice and Ryzeal, they interact with macro negatively with Ryzeal. You can't special summon any of your light pyro monsters. And then that makes the only starter that works under Macrocosmos to be, I believe you have, well, it's weird, actually. Let's see. If I recall correctly, let's see. You can normal summon X to add sword, right? And then if you normal summon Ice, you can special summon technically X to then grab you sword. But this makes it so sword is dead because you can't do anything with these two. Which I guess means Ryzeal is like a little bit just okay under Shifter, in the sense that it's playable at least, or like a macro. But then we have, let's see, Malice, which actually is severely hindered, like really severely hindered, actually. So if we go with just like a Dormouse combo versus macro. If you were to go like Dormouse, banishing White Rabbit, that there's no change yet. But once we set the trap, it doesn't matter which trap we set necessarily, but whichever trap we do end up setting, that trap will then be banished, and it will not be able to be reset by either White Rabbit or White Binder because they can only set the card from graveyard and deck respectively, or both in case of White Binder specifically, I guess. But yeah, neither of them set from banished, so that whatever card you end up setting under like a shifter or macro, that card's kind of just gone for a while at least. So that'll kind of suck, I guess. And then after this, you also lose access to 2 different plays. The most notable one being, I guess, Splash Mage, because you can just link off technically the Dormouse here for a link one in order to special summon Dormouse back because macro is active. Splash Mage cannot reborn any cards from the graveyard because there are none. And then there's also Decode. Link Decoder here that special summons itself from the graveyard, which it's going to end up being banished, so there's nothing there either. So you lose essentially 2 bodies right here. So yeah, no, not great. Neg 2 bodies here. And also March Hare. Well, this is situational, but March Hare, the only way to special summon this is to banish specifically a Malice card in your hand, which you would just need a Malice card in your hand. If you do not have one, you cannot special summon March Hare. And even if you do have one, at this point specifically, we would have a special summon Dormouse and White Rabbit. So if we were to just banish White Rabbit, the only thing we're special summoning is a single March Hare. I guess if you are able to get into like Red Ransom or White Binder, you can banish these guys if you can manage to link them off. That will be a struggle a little bit because just special summoning White Binder is probably a little bit better than Red Ransom under macro, I guess. Because then you could set one of these cards to banish the White Binder, special summon itself back. Maybe get yourself an additional body. With Red Ransom, if we activate Malice and Thunderground. Jessie Cat, I guess, might not have been banished yet. These 2 would have had to have been banished. The 1 card. Yeah. And your lines essentially are just going to be a lot worse, but at least playable. You're losing a lot of bodies, essentially. And there are a bunch of random downsides to being under macro here. But at least playable. And then if we look at decks where they're utterly unplayable, Fiendsmith. Okay, you can't really activate Sequence. Can't really, well, I guess you can technically use Tract. The most you might be able to manage under macros like Tract, or Lacrima, Reborn Engraver, Make Caesar. That'd be a very specific hand, I guess. And also, I'm not really sure how you got into. Well, wait, thinking. No, wait, you can't even do that because Tract would get banished. Alright, never mind. Sequence can this summon using monsters on field? I don't think so, right? Yeah. So it's literally unplayable. Alright, never mind. You have absolutely no place under macro. You're just like going to get bent over, basically, if you're playing Fiendsmith. And then with, for example, Voiceless Voice, the primary way you are going to ritual summon, you have one of 2 ways. You have Prayers of the Voiceless Voice here to just straight up ritual summon, or we have like Saphira. So if we were to want to use Saphira, we can't because we have to banish this card from the graveyard. So, okay, you only have Prayers of the Voiceless Voice now, alright? But if you tribute low, this doesn't special summon from banish, right? While this card is in your graveyard, special summon this card. Yeah, no. This can't be special summoned if you use this as material. But I guess you could tribute low, add low, normal summon low for Skull Guardians. I mean, like, somewhat playable at least. In terms of like Snake Eye or Snake Eye Fiendsmith, you can see how that deck does a whole lot of nothing. But yeah, I just think we need to take power away from macro. So they don't have to be specifically like decks designed exactly like Kashira, for example. But just decks that will just benefit off of macro, I think, would be a huge boon to the game to weaken macro based strategies. So they're not as prevalent, or they just aren't going to be as strong because the card could do literally nothing versus like a deck, right? I believe like Crystron gets hurt by this as well. And any deck playing like the Millennium kind of engine also gets hurt because they can not go into a Doom Dragon. Yeah, Diabellstar can't be special summoned under macro. You can't Snake Eye Ash effect to tribute itself. You can't activate original Sinful Suppose Snake Eye. A lot of terrible things, I guess, kinda. And Doom Dragon is, of course, not summonable because you cannot send cards to the graveyard because it doesn't exist, essentially. So, just that I feel like we need decks that are able to neutrally play, at least similar to Exorcister, not necessarily having insane benefits like Ash necessarily, or we could get some moderate benefits even, but not so much that that deck would be forced to play macro. Because like, if you look at Keshtira as a deck, and let's just strip off the macro effect off of the Rise Heart, what the hell does this deck actually do then? It just like maybe zone locks you with Kachira Shangri-Ira, and it is unable to play around anything. So if you actually do lines with Shangri-Ira, this opens you up to Nibiru and Typhon, for example, which just sucks in general. So you're usually better off just sticking to some Arise Heart line and only accessing the extra deck once. And also this is bad in the mirror because this allows the summon condition for Arise Heart, which allows you to get Arise Heart into Zeus, which sucks, basically. And yeah, you would have a lot of trouble with follow-up if your cards didn't get banished. Like, let's look at no macro cash. You would have to go like, if I wanted to add Fenrir or Rise Heart to my hand, I would have to banish Rise Heart from the graveyard with like tier cash, and then I would have to banish my Theosis with my Scareclaw Kishtira, or I would have to do like banish Fenrir with tier cash, and then Kishtira Rise Heart, banish a Theosis from deck in order to add like Fenrir back to my hand, or like a Birth. About the same, really, right? But it requires me 2 cards to add back 1 card. Whereas if I had like a macro effect up, these cards would be just triggering on their own, like attach to a Rise Heart, detach from a Rise Heart to activate its effect, and it'll trigger, and I'll also get the Rise Heart effect here. So yeah, you obviously would much prefer to be under macro in like cash deck, right? If we were to go to like Thunder Dragon or Branded, like there's some effects where you have like banish effects, but the decks just don't really function under macro. So those effects just don't really matter. But with Thunder Dragon in particular, it's like you don't really have ways to send your cards anyways. Like if we're going by like just pure, we have like Thunder Dragon, add Thunder Dragon, nothing changes. Thunder Dragon Dark, add Thunder Dragon. That doesn't trigger because you can only use 1 effect per turn and only once that turn. Like every single Thunder Dragon has that effect. And then what was this effect? Banish this card from your graveyard, add 1 Thunder monster from your deck to your hand. technically, I think that it might be negative for Pure Thunder Dragon. I mean, if you were to play like some sort of hybrid build, it might work out better. You're able to like send Thunder Dragon, like your Thunder Dragon cards to the graveyard or banish them by specifically effect. That might work, I guess. Can't really think of any uh, decks that are built like that with Thunder Dragon in mind under this situation, so it's like kind of awkward, but alright, I guess. If we look at like Vanquish Soul though, it's just pretty neutral. You just tag out your guys. It does affect you somewhat negatively, but it's not so bad you can't play the game at all. And I think that's the worst part about a Floodgate is when it's not just hindering your plays, it's preventing you from doing anything at all. So I mean, as long as both players are able to play under macro, it's really not that bad, right? Is it should be having a negative effect to some extent because this should be a part of your strategy, in my opinion. Like, you know, the macro I feel like should be a little bit more efficient for the player using it than player it's being used against. But you could also build around that and possibly have some benefits if you do get macroed. If there were such a deck to be just created in general. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.